Whenever I bring up Arnold's training plan, or any of the old school bodybuilders' high volume training routines, I get a few very common responses. Mostly good, and people who appreciate the insight and are motivated to try a more advanced training system. But along with that, and especially more recently, I've been getting bombarded with the typical overtraining comments. And every time I read these statements, I think to myself, I've been training this way for almost 20 years. And I've always had success with it. So why do so many people freak out when I talk about training muscle groups multiple times a week with higher training volumes? Then I remember, not everyone understands some very basic principles of bodybuilding training. And today what I want to do is break down my personal experience with this style of training, as well as explain why you might have failed with it in the past, along with the tools you'll need to be successful with it in the future. Before we get into the details, I want to show you where I started at my smallest and most early stages of training, as well as my biggest. The transformation you see was built on high volume training sessions, including my own personal 4 to 5 day mass gain programs, as well as the exact routines taken out of Arnold's Encyclopedia of Modern Bodybuilding, where training was as often as 6 days per week with AM and PM sessions included. Needless to say, I've experimented with basically every high volume training method from bodybuilders back in the 60s all the way through the 70s. And not just for a quick 30-day trial period, but sometimes years at a time, along with my own personal variations to work on my individual weak points and goals. To explain what I've done exactly to get these results, and how it was done using these old school bodybuilding methods, let's start back with my early training. Starting training at 14 years old, around 130 pounds, with your typical bodybuilding routine you would find on social media today. Back then, it was bodybuilding.com forums, way before the social media days. The routine was the basic one body part per week, training 4 to 5 days in the gym. Along with that, the standard bulking diet of eating around 4,000 calories per day. During this time, I had made my typical newbie gains and put on about a solid 20 pounds in my first 2 years of lifting. The problem was, after that time period, I literally spun my wheels for the next 3 years. Being brainwashed into thinking this was the only way to train and anything more was overtraining, I shied away from experimenting for myself. At around 19, I really started digging into Arnold's training methods and reading up much more on guys like Serge Nubret, Sergio Oliva, and all the other super high volume guys back from the 70s. At this point, I wanted to train for my first bodybuilding contest, and I knew the methods that I had been using weren't going to cut it. So I might as well make a drastic change and see what the results were. This is where my physique really transformed, and my whole philosophy of training changed, leading me on the path to where I am today. I went from your typical bro split right into Arnold's level 1 training program. And though it might sound easy, I went from hitting a muscle group once every 7 days and jumped right into 6 days per week in the gym, training every body part twice per week. This split hit chest and back in the first session, shoulders and arms in the second, legs in the third, and repeated all 3 of those workout sessions again for 6 days per week in the gym, taking Sunday off to rest. Immediately, this program buried me. Just like those typical responses I get even today, I felt like there was no way I could last on such an exhaustive routine. But despite the fact that I was walking around sore and fatigued daily, I decided to keep it up. After training using this system for a few months, I noticed the soreness dissipated, strength actually started going up for the first time in literally years, and I was feeling ready for each gym session. What I didn't realize at the time was that it literally takes months for your body to adapt to such a highly demanding program. And many people who believe that they don't have the recovery capability to train like this are not hard gainers. They're just not yet conditioned for this type of training. And while your body will adapt over time, I personally believe jumping right into it like this is not the best approach either. Regardless, training with this higher frequency and higher volume brought my body weight up to around 180 pounds in the off season. And although that's still 25 pounds lighter than my biggest, I was making progress at a faster rate than I had ever before. At 19, I started competing in my first few natural bodybuilding competitions and got my body weight down to 162 pounds using the same old school pre-contest methods that I read about used by Arnold and all the guys back in the 70s. I kept my training frequency high, training body parts 2 to 3 times per week. I kept the volume high, allowing me to keep my cardio extremely low, but still achieving contest shape while tapering my calories. I followed this process for the next few years, competing in bodybuilding until I was 21, coming in around the same weight but bringing slightly different packages to the stage. It was at this point I realized that I was doing very well competing, but I still was far away from my own personal physique goals. And constantly trying to stay lean and win shows based off the standards of physique competitions was ultimately holding me back from my own personal bodybuilding aspirations. At 22, I fully dedicated myself to achieving that complete old school bodybuilding physique that guys like Franco, Arnold, Sergio, Serge Nubret, and all the other golden era bodybuilders had. I wasn't naive though. I knew these guys all had 1 in a million genetics, and not to mention access to some of the mythical anabolic agents, but I wasn't looking to be a massive 240-pound bodybuilder either. And guys like Frank Zane were even winning Olympia contests at 185 pounds. And enhanced or not, my goal was to get as close to that old school look as possible. This is where I started experimenting with training a bit more. To be honest, that 6 day per week old school bodybuilding split that Arnold wrote about in his books, the one that was used by almost every competitor in the 70s as a standard pre-contest split, worked really well for me at the time. The problem was, I quickly realized why they used it pre-contest. The extreme volume, time in the gym, as well as overall calories burned per session made it really productive for fat loss, but not so great if you needed to pack on mass. And I was looking to add another 20 to 25 pounds to my physique. The problem is, those traditional 4 to 5 day once per week body part splits that I had originally tried never worked for me, and I knew going back to that was out of the question. I started reading up a bit more on old school training programs at this time, and found out a lot of the guys actually followed less frequent training programs in the off season, and it wasn't uncommon for these guys to be hitting the gym 4 to 5 days per week in an effort to bulk up. These were routines like upper lower splits, torso and limb splits, but even some bodybuilders were doing routines like 3 days on, 1 day off. Lee Haney had followed the chest and arms, back and shoulders, legs, off, repeat split. Similarly, Lou Ferrigno followed the chest and back, arms, legs, and shoulders, off, repeat split. The general consensus I got was in the off-season to grow, these guys were in the gym roughly 5 days per week. And that's when I started crafting my own personal program that worked best for me. My main staple that I used to gain the majority of my mass I've built today was a 5-day system I crafted after experimenting with Arnold's 6 day per week routine for so many years. Cutting down the training days from 6 to 5 and simply just rotating through the workouts, taking a rest day midweek on Wednesday and another on Sunday, still kept the training frequency of each body part high at around every 4 days, but I got in more rest days and my recovery and workouts were even better. At this point, I was also pushing the calories higher, not worrying so much about staying extremely lean in order to put on mass. My body weight was getting as high as 190 to 195 and was definitely taking on a new physique altogether. Old school, high volume, high frequency clearly works, and it was still paying off for me after 10 years of training. The main thing I was struggling with at this point was balancing training with fatigue. The thing not many bodybuilders talk about is the stronger you get and the heavier you lift, the more recovery time is needed. However, simply training less frequently to allow for more recovery doesn't always produce greater results. And in fact, many times it's a step back. To fully optimize my physique, I knew I had to prioritize, since I simply couldn't handle the extreme demands of constantly heavy lifting, trying to bring up every single muscle group at the same time. This is where I personally entered into the advanced stages of training, where I could literally only focus on 1 or 2 muscle groups at a time and had to put everything else on maintenance. Throughout the years of training, I had built some pretty solid arms, which have always been my best body part, bringing them up to over 19 inches fully pumped. But some body parts needed to achieve that classic old school physique, like really wide sweeping lats, as well as a very high and full upper chest, were things I was lacking and needed to focus on in my training. From here on out, I would apply the same higher frequency, higher volume training methods to those body parts specifically, while putting my strong body parts on the back burner and training them only at maintenance. An example of this would be hitting chest and back on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday with different exercises, rep ranges, techniques, and total volume, while training the arms and legs at maintenance with very low volume 1 to 2 times per week on Tuesdays and Saturdays. This allowed me to prioritize the muscle groups that needed to grow while bringing everything into proportion. If you're obsessed with training like me, this could be one of the hardest things you do, as you love just getting in the gym and training everything, especially your best body parts all the time. But if your goal is to build a symmetrical and aesthetic physique, the longer you do this, the more you need to prioritize body parts. This is something that I only recommend once you're truly advanced. And if you question the need to do it, you're probably not at that stage yet. Following all the methods I personally used and experimented with from all the greats, including Arnold Schwarzenegger, if I could outline a roadmap for someone looking to make the best progress possible, I would recommend something like the following. During the first 1 to 2 years of training, at this point the goal is to only focus on bringing your total body weight up and building as much muscle mass as possible across the entire body. At this point, specific body parts should not be a concern, and an old school full body 3 day per week system should be applied. Training Monday, Wednesday, and Friday while eating as many calories as possible should be the focus, all while getting as strong as possible on the main lifts. Years 3 to 5 should all be about optimizing your physique. The newbie gains are not coming anymore, and you need to think outside the box. Shorter workouts, but ones with more volume for each muscle group, body part split routines with up to 4 to 5 days in the gym, including torso and limb split, upper and lower splits, or antagonistic training systems like my 5-day mass gain program, hitting body parts multiple times per week, are all ideal at this stage. Years 6 and beyond, At this stage, most of your training should be completely custom to your own body. You should know your weak points, know how your body recovers, and you should now be able to craft your own system based on your goals. Body part specificity is key here, as you should be doing more volume, training with more frequency, and prioritizing the muscle groups that need extra attention, while placing your other muscle groups at maintenance training. Remember, old school bodybuilding is all about aesthetics, building a physique that's completely symmetrical. And while it's easy to get caught off track today by thinking it's all about mass, the guys in the 70s built these physiques focusing on bringing every body part up into proportion to achieve that classic old school golden era look. If you've personally transformed your physique using these classic high volume training systems, comment down below with your results. And if you want to build your physique using old school bodybuilding training methods, check out my 5-day mass gain program in the description. Alright guys, that's it for the video. If you want to see more of the best original bodybuilding content just like this, make sure to hit subscribe.